1 Kings 7 and 2 Chronicles 4. We heard in our last reading in 2 Chronicles 2:12 that King Hiram of Tyre said this to Solomon, "Blessed be Yahweh Elohim of Israel, who made heaven and earth, who has given David such a wise son as you." It reminds us that foreign kings were often mutually appreciative of the gods they worshipped. In other words, that sounded rather political, that Hiram would say that about Solomon's God, that he made heaven and earth. Why is that probably just a political exaggeration? Well, we know that Hiram is the king of Tyre, and Tyre worships a deity, and outside the Bible he's called the Baal of Tyre. Baal, again, is a word that just means leader or master. The Baal of Tyre also goes by Melkart, also goes by, in 2 Maccabees, Hercules. Again, gods had different names depending on the village. They were able to be, in a sense, moved about or moved around as people wanted to worship them. And so this deity that Hiram worships is very real. And the reason we know that is because this deity will figure prominently in upcoming episodes. In 1 Kings 16 through 18, we'll have Queen Jezebel worshiping this deity, and the prophet Elijah will have this competition with the prophets of Baal, and this is the deity that Elijah is battling, as it were, on Mount Carmel. Also, in Ezekiel 28, we have a extended story of this deity that is said by Ezekiel, or God says to Ezekiel through Ezekiel. This is the deity that was in the Garden of Eden, and that idea of falling or sinning in the garden. So we'll get there, but this becomes a very important deity in the story of Israel. Well, moving ahead, when we read today, we heard of pots and pans and bowls and altars, large 30-foot altars and things like this, just extravagant furnishings that Solomon was making for his temple. We also hear of other building projects that probably we know were larger and possibly more beautiful than the temple itself. One of them is called the House of the Forest of Lebanon. Probably had the appearance of a forest because it had columns that made it look like a forest, and it's larger than the temple. We also hear then, and this is again very predictive of a future problem, in 7:8 we hear that Solomon makes a house, a private residence, private palace, for the Pharaoh's daughter. So now we have the introduction, and we heard about her back in 3:1, where Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh. But now comes the official word in the text that Solomon marries an Egyptian princess, and of course coming with her would be the gods of Egypt. And looking ahead in 2 Chronicles 8:11, it says, will move her up to her palace away from the city of David because of, quote, holiness. It's as though Solomon knows that she doesn't belong around the worship of Yahweh. So he moves her out of where the ark is, it says, and moves her up into her own palace. It's very foreboding verses there. In chapter 11, verse 1, she'll be mentioned in relation to other wives, turning Solomon's heart against Yahweh. And then in 1140, coming up again, just to give you the story in a nutshell, Jeroboam will be a rebel king to come. When he hears that his life is on the line, he runs down to Shishak, king of Egypt, and finds solace with the king of Egypt until Solomon's death. Again, it's all kind of a portent or a foreshadowing that Egypt will have a large role in Solomon's downfall. Well, we can see all this, in fact, right now, that this just doesn't sound like David, does it? That he would, and maybe David was cosmopolitan in his relationships, but nothing like this, where he is buddying up with a foreign king and having, in fact, this man's foreman build his his temple, and so forth. And then this God gets involved in Israel in very clear ways. And then, of course, the gods of Egypt become involved in Israel in the future too. So again, this text is just giving us that foretaste of problems to come.